I get the privilege and the honor of introducing Dr. Mike Wahl. Mike is a professor in the Faculty of Medicine at Memorial University and brings 25 years of experience in health, media, and entrepreneurship. As the producer and host of Health Explored, he draws on insights from visiting over 55 countries and exploring diverse cultures and health practices. Dr. Wahl's academic, entrepreneurial, and global expertise make him a dynamic advocate for health and wellness, inspiring individuals to discover what health truly means to them. I've had some experience interacting with Mike in the past. I'm happy to say I didn't eat any dessert today. So not everybody here can say that. I did not have ice cream.
You should have.
Ah, come on. And if you ever need me to carry your bags to any of those 55 countries, just let me know. So Mike, we're really pleased to have you here with us. Thanks for being flexible with timing, and the stage is yours.
Thanks. All right. My mic on here, we're good? All right. All right, so we're going to start off, guys, with that part of my bio there was about what health means to you. I'm going to play a little video to begin with and see that if other people may struggle with that definition.
It's a really hard question. Well, what does health mean to me as people? That's a very difficult question.
Let me just think about this. Yeah, what is health? Real broad, eh?
Yeah, there's going to be a deep one like this.
Oh my gosh, this is so hard. Health to me. Health to me. Health to me.
But just that question, like health is such a big picture.
Yeah. So I've been lucky enough to travel to 55 countries and around the world. I've interviewed hundreds of different health experts. Some of them I've traveled to go meet them personally because I think it's the best way to be able to really experience what they're talking about. And ironically, of all these health experts, that's the most challenging question we ask at the end, and no one knows what it is, but it's what they focus their entire life on. And I had a bit of a moment in my life where I started to question what health means from my side, because I went to school my whole life. I've been in university forever, and now I'm back there teaching. It's like I've always been at university, it seems like, even when I had my company. And I realized that a lot of the things we're told, in particular in wellness, aren't applicable. And if they were, then they'd probably be working, and they're not working when you look at a place like Newfoundland and Labrador, because our health is so challenged. And so what I want to do today is share some of the lessons I've learned that I thought were really important. And I've got my lens on as a business person, so I know there's a lot of business people in this room, but also as an educator in health, and I know there's a lot of educators in this room too. And the reality is, when you look at health by the definition that we have, which is usually an absence of disease, 96% of people have at least one medical condition that requires medical attention. So the reality is no one's truly healthy by our lack of illness definition. And that doesn't mean that tomorrow you won't have something else or you won't recover. But the reality is almost everybody has one. 33% of us have 5 medical conditions. And when you think about how fascinating and how complex the human body is, it's not surprising that we'd have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 things wrong with a 50 trillion cell organism. But the reality is, it's a bit challenging. And the thing is, health is never this, I'm healthy, I'm sick. It's always on a bit of a scale. So it's like a thermometer. And we all know what a thermometer, by the way, we just had the longest spree of rain in the history of Newfoundland, I think. It rained since October 20th. That's a record for Newfoundland, which is saying something. But we all know how to read a thermometer. We all know how to read the temperature. We know that if it's plus 20 degrees out, we're going to wear shorts for sure, 100%. And if it's -2, we're probably going to drive slow on the Trans-Canada because there could be ice. We know how to use this information to make changes in the different behaviors we have. But when it comes to our health, the reality is most people have no idea what it means. Health isn't just one thing. It could be our musculoskeletal system. It could be our heart. It could be our brain. It could be our lungs. And when we go to the doctor, 60% of people have no idea what the doctor is telling us, even if we have access to a doctor. And we know that not everybody has access to the medical system. So even when we do get care, we don't understand what it is. And that doesn't mean that the advice given to us is even applicable, because maybe we have busy life at home. Maybe there's financial challenges. Maybe there's time challenges. There's different aspects a physician wouldn't know. So for most people, understanding health is like trying to smell the color 9. It's impossible, right? And so I'm going to tell a little story from both the pragmatic side and the scientific side. You guys probably all know who Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson are, right? We've all seen the movies, right? So Holmes is a bit out there, a bit extreme, and Watson was the guy who kept him on track. Straight and narrow, he was logical, he was a doctor and a researcher. And so in this story, they're trying to find this criminal, and this criminal is kind of like a bad Robin Hood. He lives out in the woods, and what he does in the middle of the night is he sneaks out, he does a heist, he robs somebody, goes back into the woods, and they can never find him once he gets back in there. So they say, okay, we're not going to get him in the woods, let's set up a perimeter so that if he comes out, we'll catch him in the act, and then we'll be able to save the day and be the heroes of the story. So they said, okay, perfect. So they went out, and they set up a perimeter of booby traps all around the forest. And then they realized they got a bit of time because he usually robs people around 3 a.m. It's not even midnight yet. Let's get a couple hours of shut-eye. So they set up the little tent, and they took a nap before they had to stake the place out. Now, shortly after they fall asleep, Holmes nudges Watson, and he's like, Watson, what do you deduce? And Watson listens, and he's like, doesn't hear anything. The traps aren't going off. So he's like, I don't know, we're camping. Maybe he's getting a little philosophical. So what does he do? He looks up at the stars, right? And he goes, what do I deduce, Holmes? So he goes, well, I see millions and millions of stars, and science would tell me that around those stars there's billions and billions of planets, and there have to be some planets that have oxygen and water and therefore life. So what do I deduce? I deduce we are not alone in the universe. Why? What do you see? And Holmes is like, well, that's pretty deep, man. He goes, I'm just wondering why we can see the stars. I think Buddy stole our tent. And when I look at where I work now in particular, in the Faculty of Medicine with the Biomedical Research Division, I see people going deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole all the time. They're doing that Holmes approach, the Watson approach, not the Holmes approach, and we're missing the obvious things. And so I got to a point where I was like, I think I need to get back to it because there's other cultures and other places in the world that are doing things a lot better than us, that are a lot healthier than us, that have a lot less than us, right? So maybe we need to unlearn some of these things we've learned and maybe get back to the bigger picture and realizing the tent's not even there. And what I've realized about health is that true health combines these four elements, in my opinion, but these are things that have been veins no matter where I've gone to in the world. I've been to every continent but Antarctica, talking to people about health, and there's four things: purpose, community, our physical health, and our mental health. And we talk a lot about these two over here, but we don't really emphasize these, and these are two things that we actually have readily available to us in Newfoundland and Labrador compared to other parts of the world that we're just like untapped resources for us. So let's talk with purpose first. First thing I'll say is that purpose changes throughout our lives, right? So like as we progress, our idea of what purpose means is different. So your students in the class are going to have a different definition of what success is, and other people are going to define it as something else as they get later in their career. But there is a bit of a pattern. So for example, at age 4, success isn't peeing your pants. At age 12, it's having friends. At age 16, it's having a driver's license. At 20, it's snuggling with your partner. And at 35, it's having money. And at 50, it's having money. And at 65, it's snuggling with your partner. And at 80, it's having a driver's license. See where I'm going? 90, having friends. And at 100, it's not peeing your pants. That's great. So it is a bit cyclical, but it does change throughout our lives. One of the things I was really interested in were the areas called the blue zones. And there's lots of research saying that these aren't necessarily places where there's extended longevity, but the reality is there's traits about each one of these areas, and there's different ones. Loma Linda in the United States, Nicoya in Costa Rica, Sardinia, Italy, Ikaria, Greece, and Okinawa, Japan, where people live exceptionally long lives. And I've been to 3 of these 3 right here. And ironically, in a place like Nicoya is a place where the poorest people live longer than the richest people, which is completely backwards for us because socioeconomic status usually dictates health and our population. But this is Okinawa. Now, Okinawa is gorgeous. I didn't know it was so pretty when we went there, but it's about 4 hours south of Tokyo. So we flew into Tokyo and ended up going down to Okinawa. And in Okinawa, what you see is that in Japan in general, you're going to see that their lifespan is much higher than anywhere else in the world. But Okinawa is even higher than the rest of Japan. And it's a place where the oldest women in the world live in particular, which is really interesting. It's partly to do with their diet, but a lot to do with their community. This guy right here is an 88-year-old sensei whose great-great-grandfather looks exactly like the sensei in Kill Bill with the big Fu Manchu, and his great-great-grandfather created Kobudo. And I didn't know what Kubota was, but Kubota is what the Ninja Turtles do. And if you guys remember Braveheart, and you guys like, the British won't let us train with weapons, we have to train with stones, right? Well, they use farm tools to be able to train. So a nunchuck's actually a rice flail, and the bow staff that Donatello had was the end of a rake, and a sai is used for planting seeds with 3 little holes every time you move forward. And I didn't know this. But anyway, this is him at 88 years old. He's not very slow. It's also this tall. First thing he did when we walked in there is he pulls up his gi and he grabs a 20-kilogram sledgehammer, it's like 50 pounds, and starts banging his shins as hard as he could, and the whole dojo was shaking to show how strong his bones were at 88. He was tough as nails. His son is the world champion for Kubota. And I did a lesson with him, and he was very patient, and I was very uncoordinated. But he had purpose in his life, right? And purpose was what drove him to continue to teach people, and he's taught hundreds of thousands of people all around the world. And it's a philosophy they have in Okinawa called Ikigai. And Ikigai means reason for being. And what's beautiful about it is they're taught it from the time that they're like this big, that you need to have purpose. And it's a combination of 4 things, which I think is beautiful. In order to have reason for being, according to them, you need to do something you love, you need to do something you're good at, you need to do something you get paid for, and you need to do something the world needs. And what I love about this concept, in particular for the educators in this room, because you all are educators, but this really is satisfied by helping other people and giving them knowledge. And that's why I chose to be a professor later on in my career. I think that teaching people is an amazing gift that you can get paid for, and if you're good at it, that's fantastic. The world needs it, right? And I love it. So this right here has been my ikigai as being an educator. But this is a philosophy that they look at and they reevaluate. And what they found was that later on in life, for example, they even readapted it. So when they retired, I met this group of old guys. They're called Gardening with Old Guys, and they were all Japanese. Some of them had been friends for over 90 years. They had this concept called MOA. And I got a picture of them here coming up. But essentially what they did was when they didn't need to make money anymore because they retired, they would garden for their community for free, and they would grow these gorgeous orchids. And the orchids were so beautiful, they would sell them for charity. So they would make money as part of their purpose, and that would help fund youth sports programs. So the oldest generation taking care of the youngest. And I thought that was the first thing. So purpose for me was something that was really important. So if you don't have all those elements maybe in one aspect of your life, like just your career, you should focus on like filling that in somewhere else. If there's something you're really good at or something you love to do that you don't get to fulfill in one aspect, then take up a hobby or do something else. But if you can satisfy those 4 elements throughout the activities of your day, you're going to have a lot more fulfillment. And that was something that really drew. And that's why these people lived to be so old. The other thing that they had there was community. So I'm going to stick with Okinawa because it's such an incredible thing. And they call it MOA. And Newfoundland and Labrador, because we're so isolated, we have a sense of community. We've all been to weddings before where somebody goes to the mainland and they marry somebody from the mainland, they come back home and they bring their new best friend from the mainland, and they go to, and this guy hired a speech writer to give the best man speech, and it falls flat, and then some uncle gets up and the whole place has gone crack. That's just Newfoundland, right? And that's our community. And that's a connection that lasts a lifetime. There's so many people in our community that have this connection, in particular when you just get outside of St. John's. Where people have known each other for their entire lives, and that has huge value. This is an exercise class. That woman right there is 100 years old. I measured an 85-year-old, and her blood pressure was 120/70, which is better than good, which is pretty incredible for that age because you're supposed to get stiffer arteries. But they focus on this connection, which is really important. And what it does is it allows you to stay involved, and we know that things like dementia and cognitive decline are associated with loneliness. It allows you to share common backgrounds, and they have this philosophy called Yamaru, which means it's a spirit of cooperation and mutual support. And I think Newfoundland also has that. So don't underestimate how important your community is. And when we're busy, and we've all been there before, where we're really busy with things, we have to prioritize having that connection. And going into the holidays is a perfect time to make sure you even just reach out to somebody and let them know that you're thinking about them and that you care, or write a little Christmas card or a note or a holiday card or whatever you celebrate in order to have that connection. Because this, as much as almost any other behavior for wellness, is something that's keeping people alive for a long time. This is a woman who is, they have a beauty pageant, but it's not a beauty pageant in Okinawa. It's a wellness pageant where they get the oldest people in the community, in this case it was women, and they have to compete to show who's the fittest one. She's 88, she bikes 20 kilometers a day, and she goes and touches her toes and just goes down, and she asked me to touch my toes, so I went like this, because I couldn't do the real thing. But they celebrate this aspect of wellness. And what does she do? She gets, for the full year, she gets crowned Miss Katana Kazuku, and she goes to every event, and she promotes health and wellness for all other generations. It's absolutely fantastic. So that was in Okinawa, which is a fantastic, beautiful place. But this woman right here, her name is Maria, and she's from Nicoya, which is in Costa Rica. Nicoya has this blue zone, and they think it's because they didn't have roads for a long time. It was all dirt roads. Even if you go to like famous tourist places there now, it's still dirt roads in a lot of places. But they were isolated, so they didn't have agrochemicals. They all had organic crops. They had multi-generational households. But Maria was always a chef, and she's taught thousands of people around the world how to cook pinto gallo, which is the most basic food, rice and beans, right? But it's heralded as one of the healthiest foods we could possibly eat, high in fiber, high in protein, good carbohydrates. And what she said was that we first interviewed her. The first thing she answered, I said, tell me about yourself. She goes, oh, I'm Maria. I'm here to tell the same lies I tell everybody. Because everybody wants to interview the little old lady, right? She's 102. And then we wouldn't let her go, though. We kind of grilled her for like a half an hour, 40 minutes. And by the time we finished, I said, what's your secret? Like, she goes, my life has been really, really sad. I've buried my husband, all of my family, my kids have died of old age, right? She goes, I've been surrounded by sadness my entire life. She goes, but cooking is something that brings people around my table. They look forward to it. It makes me feel good to nourish them. I can give people that don't have enough food. I can share, and I can hear stories and stay connected. And I thought that was beautiful because she was able to deal with really unimaginable sorrow with everybody you've ever loved passing away. She said it's almost a curse, but she's been able to keep it together by fostering community. And she did it around something that she was good at and that she loved and she knew. And I think there's some value to that. And it wasn't necessarily that she was trying to cook healthy food. She just cooked food that brought people together. And I think the benefits of her food wasn't so much that it was healthy, it was that it was good for people to be around a table together. On that same note, I'm going to keep on going here with some of the lessons I learned. Physical health is interesting. My background was I did exercise physiology, so straight out of UNB, where I went. If anybody knows about University of New Brunswick, they had a really good hockey team. And it just so happened I was the Molson rep for campus. And so the hockey team said, when they found out I could get them free beer on the road, everybody was applying to be the trainer for the hockey team, but then they found out I could get them free beer at Mount A and Acadia. So they were like, why don't you be our trainer? So I got this amazing job where coming out of school, I had a reference that said like 4-year national strength coach, champion, whatever. And then I got a job training the New York Rangers in the States purely because of Molson Canadian. I learned a lot, mind you. I was pretty good by the time I got out, but at first I had zero qualifications other than that. Anyway, my whole life was about training perfectly. And I was guilty of this, right? I was like, you got to have the right rep schemes and you have to periodize your workouts, and you have to stretch a certain amount of time, and you got to have your heart rate at this level, and you got to improve your strength this much each week, right? And it was all about perfection. And the reality is that doesn't work for a lot of people because it's very exclusive, right? It's hard. People don't enjoy it. It's not fun. It's effective. But that's not the whole key to being physically healthy. So what did I do? I went to Norway. This is me. This is going to play. Yeah, this is me at the back, climbing up a mountain with a former Norwegian ranger. If anybody knows any Norwegians, they're insanely active. You go to a fancy restaurant and no one is wearing a suit. They're wearing Gore-Tex at the end of the day because they climbed a mountain. Then they went to go get a bite to eat. So I was dying. We climbed up the thing the same height as Grossmorn on these skis, and then we skied down, and it was beautiful. They have this philosophy called mestring, which means something is way better if you work hard for it. So they do one run, but they climb a mountain to do it. He goes, if you just want adrenaline, go to a ski resort and bomb the hill. He goes, but if you want to feel really accomplished and feel good about what you did, then do something hard. And that was really important. And then the other thing he said to me, we sat down, we were eating a Kit Kat bar, and this is Andreas. This is another guy who owns a big sauna company over there. And he's on the national team for cross-country skiing, which is like being the national team for hockey in Canada, right? And I said, what's the key? He goes, man, we just play. And I was like, what? No, you just got to be perfect. You got to have it all planned out. You got to be training. He's like, no, man, we just play and we enjoy it and we do what we love. And when I did my PhD, I had this study where I took people and I made them exercise perfectly, and some people weren't active at all, and some people got to do whatever they wanted. And what I found was the difference between people that exercised perfectly and the people that did what they wanted was nothing. Now, they all did way better than somebody who doesn't exercise. But when I followed up a year later, everybody who was doing it perfectly quit because they hated it, and everybody who was doing what they liked to do continued it, and they had way better health outcomes. So the reality is, I've had to delete all those years of my master's and my undergrad for the vast majority of us, because it's about just doing something that you like, which is why Europeans walk and they're just moving around, but there's no gyms anywhere, and they're being active. So when it comes to your physical activity lesson for the next year, I would say find a hobby that gets you moving, and the gym, if you like that, that's great. But like, don't pressure yourself to conform to these things that people are trying to sell you on physical activity, because you don't need it. We just need to move. We're called Homo erectus, not Homo sit down all day long. So just go and move, right? So that was the first thing, yeah. Good. You like that one? Yeah, it's true. It is true though. You know, and it's funny, and as we age, like I'm 46 now, and the advice I used to give 46-year-olds when I was 23, I would have punched me in the face because, you know, it wasn't applicable, right? I'm too beat up. This guy's Dr. Ivo Parisi. How am I doing for time? Good? Okay, still good? Okay, we're getting through it. Dr. Ivo Parisi is a longevity researcher and a chef, and he gave up science because he was sick of looking deeper down the rabbit hole and wanted to look at the bigger connections. And I asked him, I said, how important are genetics? And he's a geneticist. He said it's about 15%. But 85% of it is where we live, and that's called epigenetics. And he lives in a place where they go to the market and it looks like this. Now, we don't have that, right? But one thing that we do have is community. I went out with his friends, none of them could speak English, and we cooked up this local fish called mullet fish on the grill, and we had a glass of wine. And I looked at him, I said, you guys drink lots of wine here, it makes you live a long time, there must be health benefits. He goes, no, all wine is slightly toxic. That's the reality. A small amount is the small toxic effect. He goes, but if you have a small amount and you're surrounded by a bunch of people that you care about, well, that's going to give you tremendous health benefits because you're together. And this is the place where the oldest men in the world live, because they have these wine cellars where they hang out and they have a little bit of wine and they hang out all night long. And he said, with a good bottle of wine and a nice meal, you can speak any language in the world. And we did. We had one of the best nights of our life. And I knew that what we were doing wasn't perfect, hence the dessert comment. But if it makes you happy, that's a huge part of the equation too. And that brings me to the last part, which is mental health. So when it comes to mental health, there's a curve here where we don't want to have no stress, but we don't want to have too much stress, or else we end up going over the edge. And we look at mental health rates in our population, our youth are under fire, right? Like, if you're middle-aged, you're probably okay. When it comes to the rates, you're average, which 80% of us will get a mental health condition at some point in our life, so none of us are out of the clear. But our youth are really struggling these days when it comes to depression, because this is the world we're living in, right? Like, this is fine, everything's okay. But stress is an ancient response for us. We used to think when we heard something that it was either a lion in the woods or a chipmunk in the woods. And the people that thought it was a chipmunk and it was actually a lion, would get eaten. So the reality is, everybody in this room is a descendant of the person that chose to run away, whether it was a chipmunk or a lion. That's how we survived. So being stressed was a natural adaptation that was important for us in our survival. But now, the way we respond to stress is the same way we did when we were running away from a lion. Like, when my students are writing exams, their palms are sweating. It does not help you fill out a Scantron with sweaty palms. Our heart rate going up when we get an email we didn't want to see come in, that doesn't serve us when we're typing a response. But our body has this physical response to everything. And this guy, Andreas, the guy who said to play, he owns these sauna companies where he made me jump into the ocean, 0 degrees in the Arctic Circle in Tromsø, Norway. And he did it because it helps you to manage your stress. Because when I jumped in there, what happened? My pupils dilated, my breathing increased, my heart rate increased, and I had this massive fight or flight response. And he made me stay in there until my body calmed down. And he's like, you need to calm down, and once you've proven you can control your body, we'll let you get out. And then I was able to control it. And that's what these cold plunges are for, by the way, in case you see it. It's not so you can post it on social media and look cool. The real reason is to get yourself used to calming yourself when you feel that feeling. So when you get the email at the office and something goes wrong, you're able to go, whew, and calm down. Because when you calm down, your whole system can calm down, and you can reduce the response to that stress by about half. Because that's emotional agility. The reality is, we can't control people pissing us off, but we can control how long it affects us. And the ability to be agile when we get thrown off kilter is critically important. And that's what this stuff is for. Understanding that when we get stressed, the best thing you can do is be aware of what that feels like. Take a second, calm yourself, so you're not dealing with a freaking out mind and a freaking out body. You're just dealing with a freaking out mind. Because both together, it's a really vicious combination where you can't make good decisions, right? So this is a thing I say, if you had a bank account with $86,400 and somebody stole $1,000 from you, would you call them up and be like, good scam, but you left $85,400 in my bank account? You never would. But there's 86,400 seconds in a day. And one meeting that's 15 minutes long has about 1,000 seconds. And how often have we had a crummy meeting for 15 minutes where the entire day is thrown off? Because that's exactly what we've done. We've given that person that experience the rest of our day, all the rest of our bank account, because we weren't able to be agile with stress. I love this video. This is an old football play. You don't need to understand football to see it. And I'll tell you what, there's been lots of times in our lives when somebody scored on us like that. They tricked us, right? But what does a good coach do after a game where they lost and somebody scored a touchdown? They watch film. If you go and you have a day that you're off kilter, instead of complaining about what happened, you should reevaluate what happened and how did they score the touchdown on you, and learn how to set up a defense. Because the next time they run that play, you're going to let them get 20 yards, not a touchdown. Third time, you're going to sack them at the line of scrimmage, right? And then they're going to stop running the play, and then they'll start running their third, fourth, fifth best play. And yes, somebody will run a trick play or a Hail Mary on you at some point and score a touchdown, and then you got to give them a pat on the back and then calm down and get on. You know, that's the key. And that's one of the things I learned from the Norwegians, who are pretty stressed in general when they're able to handle it. Okay, I'm running low, aren't I, guys?
No, you've got about another 10 minutes.
Oh, good. Perfect. Good.
Craig, you going to chime in?
Okay, great. All right. So this is something we all know, the ocean, right, in Newfoundland. And when I started to look at mental health, I always wanted to look at it from a standpoint that made sense to me. Later on in life, when I got out of my business and I started to realize I needed to have balance in my life, I got really drawn to the water. I surf in Newfoundland and I spend time by the water. I proposed to my wife by the ocean, and there was always something really calming about it. So I found this book called The Blue Mind. And out of the blue, I decided to contact the author on LinkedIn. And I was like, I love your book. It's changed my life. It's about how our mind calms down. We're close to the ocean. And I said, I'd love to interview you. He goes, well, you know, anytime you get to Hawaii, you can interview me. I said, I'm actually flying through Hawaii on the way to New Zealand in a month. I would love to see you. When works for you? And we booked an interview. He's since passed on, which is really tragic, but I got a chance to meet him, and he was one of my real guiding mentors when it came to it. We became really close friends after this. And his name was Dr. Wahl. He was a marine biologist who had the same experience and wanted to read a book, and somebody said that book doesn't exist, so he wrote it. And he started a whole movement called the Blue Mind Movement. And what he found was that water does make a difference. That's why we buy houses with views of the ocean. We pay extra for a hotel room looking over the beach, or we just spend a week of our vacation just sitting on a beach staring at the ocean. It does something magical for us. And I was on the way to New Zealand to work with these youth. These are Maori youth. There's the indigenous population of New Zealand. These boys were all selected for the program because they all been incarcerated, or they had drug abuse problems or violent crime. The founder of the group said that some people fall through the cracks, but these boys were born in the cracks. There's a lot of gang violence in New Zealand, which is surprising. And so what they did was they reconnected them with the water. And so the Maori people are called people of the land, but they used to be called Tia Moana, you know, the movie Moana. They used to be called people of the sea. They traveled in these big wakas from Polynesia. Some ended up in Hawaii, some ended up in New Zealand. They created surfing, they created canoeing and outriggers and all these different things. So what they did was they connected them with the ocean as part of their training, and they created a community around it. And the relapse rate was next to nothing. These kids all became functioning members of society. It was incredible to see. So after I learned that, I was like, okay, there's a lot of value to this, but there's some things I just can't get. Like I've tried yoga, I tried meditation. Sometimes it's hard when your mind is going all the time. So I went to India, and I went up to the Himalayas, and I learned to meditate with experts up there. And I went through the spice markets in Delhi. This is up in the Himalayas. It was gorgeous. We flew in there. I learned how to breathe with a pranayama specialist and a yoga person, and it was great. But when I was in Delhi, I found it was just so hectic. I couldn't really understand how did this culture that's so busy, because has anybody here been to India before? Okay, it's very busy, right? It's incredible. And when I met somebody there, he said, you know, these philosophies came from out of need because everything is so busy, right? And so I went to this school in a slum called the School of Happiness. This is our director, Braden, and James, our cameraman, myself. And these kids all had next to nothing. But they went to this school, and it was funded, and they learned how to read and write, but they also taught them yoga and meditation twice a day as part of their schooling. And that was to deal with the stresses of what they faced. And what I was taught was that yoga and things like this aren't exercise. They call it a practice because what you do when you do these poses is you're trying to get yourself in a state of mind, but the reality is it's supposed to be a way of being all the time. The poses and the exercise and the breathing is just a way to bring yourself into that moment when you get out of it. And so they were trying to teach these kids this, and this is a guy who founded the school, and he has a really interesting thing about, like, when you live in a community like that and there's so many people, you can't think for yourself, you have to think for everybody else. And when you do that, you expand how much impact you can have from just your limited self. Oh, a second.
If you come to India, you see everywhere there is a kiosk, but there is order inside. And order is what? Who you really are, why you are here, what is the meaning of life, why I should do something for others. So these are the things being taught since childhood. The whole universe, the whole planet is your family. Don't think for only yourself. If you're thinking yourself, you become limited. Once you think for everyone, you become unlimited. So your thought, your intention, your quality, your smile becomes so infinity. So you don't worry about your limitations. But once you think about only yourself, you completely give your size to limitations. Then chaos start.
Yeah. So it was a really interesting perspective. And you think about a lot of the themes we've heard this morning, because I was here for the morning, is you guys have done so much for your community, right? You guys have helped our show. We wouldn't be able to educate the people. You know, our mission is to give people health information without having to pay for it, right? And it's such an important topic for people. But you guys are doing such good around, and that's really important. And when you do that, it does expand who you are, and it makes you feel like you're part of something. The last thing was that, last place I want to share with you was a trip to Bhutan. Bhutan is a place that measures gross national happiness as opposed to GDP. And so they only put policies in place if it makes people happier. So their king renounced power and said, here's the deal. If I do leave power, I want you to make everything in this government work around making people happier and healthier. And my father passed away of pancreatic cancer. And before he passed, he says, I want you to find happiness. And I was pretty happy, I thought, but I really didn't have a lot of balance. And this is one of the reasons I went on these travels and do the work I do now. And so I wanted to go to the place that values it most. And ironically, back to my UMB days, UMB trains a lot of their master's and PhD students from Bhutan for some reason, which is wild. So I had connections through some colleagues. This right here is my den as a kid. You notice my friends used to tease me and say we're the only house at a museum. These are all pictures and keepsakes from all over the world, from all of our family. And my family always used to say that happiness was like mining diamonds. They're little small moments, and you don't need a lot of them to be rich because they're really precious, right? And so I was raised thinking about that, and I wanted to see if that was implemented over there. And so this is the Tiger's Nest, which is the birthplace of Buddhism in Bhutan. Obviously, it's an important part of their community where they named their country after it. And it was this gorgeous temple. And I remember after spending time with these people and realizing what they preach, I realized that there was a consistency among how they define happiness across everybody. So I asked people around the world what health was. No one could tell me a straight answer. But when I asked every person, whether they lived in a rural farm town or they were in a diplomat, they would all answer that happiness was the same thing. And what I realized was their definition of happiness is completely different than ours. Our definition of happiness is ecstasy or joy or exuberance. So we got a new vehicle, we got a raise, we got a promotion, we got these other things that are amazing happen to us. That's not happiness. That's not sustainable. That's like the peak of a wave, and then there's always a trough after that. After every mountain, there's a valley, right? And so that's not sustainable for us to constantly want to be in this state of perfection and happiness like this. Theirs is a lack of that. Theirs is not too high, not too low. It's good. Everything's great. I'm happy. I'm good. And if you've ever seen 7 Years in Tibet, you'll see the scene where Brad Pitt pulls out his scrapbook and starts showing a lady all of his accomplishments. She's like, this is not what we do here. I don't get it. And I didn't understand that until I went there, which was pretty incredible. And so I met with this woman, and she said, this is some kids. They were beautiful people, and they have a strong tie to their culture. They're wildly educated. I went into a classroom for any instructors here. We were in class. They're very educated. Their English is perfect. Hands go up. They stood up, answered the question perfectly. They were talking like macroeconomics, like global stuff. It was incredible. But they were really happy people. And this is Dr. Sencho Lamu, who did her PhD in happiness. And I met her through UMB, and I went over and visited her in her home.
I don't think happiness is a journey. You know, happiness just happens in the moment. And and each moment could give, the source for your happiness, each moment could differ from time to time. So I think happiness is not a journey, but it is in the moment. Yeah. I think it's having a positive attitude. Instead of seeing a glass half empty, seeing it half full makes a difference.
I think that's an important lesson, right? And so talking about a glass being half empty, half full, I guess the overall message for this is that I think this is probably a different wellness talk, or at least hopefully it is, than you've heard before. We didn't talk about nutrients, we didn't talk about rep schemes, we didn't talk about that stuff. We just talked about overall balance in our life, right? And the things that I've learned, and most of them have never come from a textbook. But I think our health is like a glass of water, where every drop of water in that glass is the same size, same importance, same significance as any other drop of water, right? But if you think about that glass, it only takes one drop to make the whole thing start to overflow. So most of us wake up one day and we're unhealthy. And we go to the doctor, or we go see somebody and we say, there's something wrong, I'm unhealthy, I don't know what's wrong, I've been doing the same thing for 20 years. Why all of a sudden am I not healthy now? And it's because we were slowly putting drops in and slowly filling up that glass. So the goal, I would say, for everybody in our communities would be this. First thing we have to do is identify what a drop of water is in our glass. And if you can avoid putting that drop of water in, then do that. But if it's something you don't want to give up, like Friday pizza night, which is your family time, then don't give it up. Just find out how to take a drop out somewhere else. So then at least your glass doesn't get any more full. And maybe you learn how to take out 2 drops for every 1 you put in. So you're still doing the things you love in life, but you're learning how to empty the glass in other ways that don't mean as much to you, which are easy to fit into your lifestyle. And if we can do that, I think we have a much more sustainable approach towards health that'll work for everybody in our community. That's my chat. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Yeah.